Hey guys, Brian Castro here with Better Chess Training. And today I'm going to start a little three-part series. I played in a chess tournament this weekend, actually with my son. He was in the unrated beginner section, and I was in the open, and had a few good games. I ended up going 3-0 and winning the tournament, and I'd like to show you the games and from an instructive point of view. It's not that these games were perfect, but there were a few themes throughout the tournament that I think would be very instructive and helpful for beginning and intermediate players. So why don't I get started here? Today we're going to be covering my first round game, and I'm playing a nice guy named Ferdinand. He's about a 1700 player. I think at the time of the tournament, his rating was 1780. And my rating at the time of the tournament, USCF rating was 1823. But let's get started here. I'm playing white. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through and I'm not going to, I'm going to try to discuss sort of the important concepts without getting too lost in too many variations, at least until the critical points of the match. Um, I think sometimes we can get caught up with um, too many variations from an instructive point of view, and so I'll try to keep it a little bit at a higher level in terms of that. Okay, um, here my opponent goes into a King's Indian, and against King's Indian, I don't play. I guess the classical variation, which would be c4 and preparing for e4 here. I don't play that. Instead, I play e3, which is kind of in line with the Kali treatment, which I have played before on other videos. Bishop to g7, knight b to d2, and d6. So he's going for a straight King's Indian defense setup. Other options here, because e4 wasn't played, you can go right into a Grunfeld type setup as well. Okay, d6, bishop to e2. And some of you may be asking, why don't I play something like bishop to d3? And part of it is because of black's kingside fianchetto here. So the bishop on d3, let me just show you that, is not necessarily as effective because um, because of these pawns in the way. So uh, from from e2, we have ideas of going maybe to f3 at some point, as well as keeping this d file clear, as we'll see a little bit later, could be very helpful. But in any case, just a quick note there. Knight b to d7, castles, castles. Everything so far is good. C4 and C5. Okay, now one of the concepts I want to discuss today is that of being comfortable maintaining tension. Um, so here we have tension because I can take his pawn here, he can take my pawn here, and sometimes I think people, especially beginning and intermediate players, want to resolve that tension very quickly. So, and sometimes it's the right thing to do that, but um, sometimes we need to be comfortable keeping it. Let me just give you a quick example. If I were to take on c5, well, now he's got a nice half-open c-file. He could put his knight here, and I can drive his knight away, but he'll have ongoing pressure based on this c-file. Okay. The other way to relieve the tension here would be to put this on d5. Now this does gain some space and makes this into a backward pawn, but again, not that he would play it right here, but he's got this nice e5 square that can't be contested. So, anyways, so it's important when we're, especially in the opening phase of the game, that we need to be patient with these type of things. Again, sometimes it is the right thing to resolve the tension, but we need to not jump to that as our default response. Okay, b3, and so my plan here is just to develop my bishop here. Queen to c7, all very good. And here what he's thinking of now, obviously it's supporting this pawn here. but also it's lining up on this e5 square, and we'll see that a little bit later. Bishop to b2, rook to e8. So his plan was very clear to me at this point. He wants to push e5. And again, this is one of those situations where not rushing to resolve the tension can be very helpful. By the way, in this game here, right now it's about even. There is no, neither side has a significant advantage or disadvantage, but we each have our own plans that we're trying to play for. For black, I'm sorry, for white, eventually I would like to plan some type of e4, e5 if given the opportunity. Would play on the central in the central files here, and but right now I kind of have a flexible opening setup, so I'm not really tied into any one plan. And in fact, in this case, I'm kind of letting him dictate how I'm going to do things and just putting my pieces on good squares. Okay, queen to c2. My idea here is I want to have a little more coverage on this e4 square. Okay, e5 is played. Now, here's a big decision, and again, there's a couple things I could do. I could, of course, take on c5, I could take on e5, and I could push this, or I could just do nothing. Couple thoughts I had here was I really didn't want my dark square, or my dark square bishop to get pinned in. So part of my thought was to clear that. The other thought is I have to always be ready for this e4 push if I decide not to take this pawn. Okay, and in some of the opening systems I play, I allow that, and then my knight drops back to e1, or in some cases to d2. So these are the things you have to think of when you have this tension. So you can see this theme here is sort of how to handle the tension and being patient and making sure you pick up the right opportunities. Okay, so here I decided to take, and the reason why was in all of the scenarios I feel I had a decent position. So now what am I doing? I'm opening up this D file. It's a half open file, and here he does take back with the pawn, but let me just show you what happens if he takes back with the knight. Then I can take with my knight, and then when he takes back with the pawn, then again we have this open file here. I can get my rooks here. Again, it's a fairly even game. It's not that I won the game this way, but even at this point, I thought I could even do something like this because I have this queen here protecting this e4 square. So that was sort of my idea when I played queen to c2. And again, of course, that could be exchanged as well. But I have a nice, comfortable game. My only real problem, per se, it's not really a problem because the other plan would be to bring my bishop here to f3. What would be what the activity of this light square bishop. Okay, going back to the game. He did take back with the pawn. And here, I played h3. Okay, so why did I do that? So one of his ideas is to push this pawn onto e4. Okay, and as you can see here, this queen then is starting to eye the h2 square. And then the general thing I was trying to prevent was an idea of this knight going here and some type of checkmating threat. So kind of a prophylactic move. I thought it was the right time to play it. Also, I wanted to give him a chance to see what he would do here. Let me just clear these out. The one thing I wasn't going to do, I did consider it, was playing e4. So that might have been a move that you might have thought of as something that I could do. And definitely it's not a bad move, or at least it's not a tactically horrible move. But the problem is that it does a few things that I thought were negative to my position. Now this light square bishop is very bad. There's no real way that I'm going to activate it, so I'm going to hopefully try to trade that if I were to do that. The other thing, now it ties down my knight to the protection of this pawn. Because right now my queen is protecting it, but at some point, if you can imagine, he could bring his queen over, he could play b6, and then bring his bishop over, all bearing down here, and now my pieces are tied here. And this nice file that I've opened up will be clogged here because I'll have to bring my bishop over. to protect, and I'll have to put a rook here on the e file. So I didn't want that to happen. And also he can easily play something like knight to f8 to e6 and plop a nice knight onto d4. Now you could say, well, I could probably do the same thing here with d5. But so what you see here, it's not that this position is losing for me or horrible, but it's now more of a symmetrical, a little more symmetrical, maybe a little more drawish type position. So I wanted to maintain some type of imbalance. And again, it's more of a dynamic imbalance, meaning that the positions, each position has its pro and con, but both have, it's a fairly even position anyway, but at least there's a little bit of dynamics in the position that we can have something to fight over, some ideas to contest. Okay, so moving on. So I did play h3, and here he played b6, and now I know what he's going to do. He's going to play his bishop here to b7. One of the things I was worried about or concerned about was that eventually he would bring his bishop to f5, and I had some ideas of trading my light square bishop there. But now he's going to be putting it onto b7, probably because he saw that this pawn on h3 could threaten things like g4. And I brought my rook to the d file. Now, here is an important point. This is actually just a practical matter. During the game, my opponent at this point in the game was losing a lot of time. The game was game in 45, meaning we both had 45 minutes on our clock. So at this point in the game, and I don't have the exact timing, but I probably had about 25, 30 minutes still on my clock. And he was down to maybe 10 minutes at this point, because I think he was trying to figure out whether he should push the pawn or how he should deal with these things. And this is one of the advantages, like I said, about being patient, is that you're making your opponent make all of the hard decisions. Not that my decisions weren't hard, but you're making him, if you relieve the tension too early, then it's very easy because now he can go on with his own plans. But if you're leaving that tension in, he's thinking to himself, well, should I relieve the tension myself or whatnot? So kind of a practical advantage as well. So I'm gaining time on the clock, meaning that later in the game, and this plays very importantly in this game, because my opponent, remember, he's in his kind of mid-1700s. He's not a horrible player. He's not going to lose by like a very simple tactic or something like that. We still have to outplay him. And so he is, by gaining that advantage on the clock and in an even position, and as it's going to get a little more complicated position, it really gives me advantage. It gives him more chances to make mistakes. With that in mind, here, one decision I had to make was whether to play the king's rook or the queen's rook to the d file. And I made a decision fairly quickly. Part of it was I still had ideas. Maybe I'm playing a4 and a5, so I wanted this rook here. But I thought to myself very deliberately, don't spend a lot of time on this decision because it's not a make or break decision. So I kind of quickly probably took about 30 seconds on the clock and made the decision to move my rook. I knew it was a good idea to put a rook on the d file. So sometimes when you have, you're not playing a correspondence game where you have indefinite time or a lot of time, you have to make these practical decisions. Okay, my opponent plays bishop to b7. Again, a very good move, lining up here. And now I'm thinking to myself, again, playing e4 is not a good idea. And I thought about this when I decided to play h3. This is one of the reasons behind h3 is now I'm going to remaneuver my knights, okay? Because if we look at my pieces, this knight's not doing that much at the moment. This knight is well placed, but with this bishop bearing down on it and this potential for him to play e4, I just played knight to h2. And the idea here is that I'm keeping my position flexible. I can go a lot of different places, and at this point in the game, there's no reason for me to make a definite commitment to either one. So I can play knight to h2, it gets it out of the way. And then the other idea here, of course, as we'll see, is I'm going to play bishop to f3. So I'm going to cause him to either trade off his, I would say, his more active bishop, or for my less active bishop, or force him to play e4. Either way, I felt pretty good about that. Okay, he played rook a to d8. Good move, taking planning to contest this file. And then I played bishop to f3. I would be very happy, of course, if you were to take it, and then I would just go ahead and either way, I could take back with either knight. Now you can see I'd have this open file, and this knight would say go to this knight would go to g3. Okay, but he did not do that. Instead, let's see. Let me get back to my spot here. Instead, he played e4. Okay. Now, this is kind of what I had seen this type of position, and I thought it was good for me. A couple things here. I've got a nice square here on d5 that I might use at some point. I don't think I ended up using it during this game, but definitely had its potential right there. Also, he's now blocking off his light square bishop. So this bishop now is totally useless for the most part. And my initial thought, okay, so sometimes in the games you have a thought and then you have to change your mind based on what you see after your opponent moves. So my initial thought was that if he played e4, I would play my bishop to g4 like this, and then he would trade it and everything would be great because I get rid of my bishop that's being blocked here, and now I've got these knights in this closed position to jump onto this, this nice square here, or I was even eyeing d6 as a square. However, once I looked at the position, I realized that, well, you know what? I've kind of given something to him as well, and that was the d3 square. Okay, and we can see here it's a nice juicy square. I evaluated at this point that it wasn't that big of a deal, or at least it didn't go on my radar that much when I allowed him to play e4. But I realized that I would want my light square bishop to defend that square. Okay, so think about that when you're making your trades. What squares you want to defend and what pieces you want to defend it. So I play my bishop back to e2. He played his knight into e5 as was expected, and now again, I have a great bishop here, so it'd be, I think, a strategic mistake to take this knight here with this bishop. So instead, I played my knight here. Okay, and again, it's a good position. Thinking of hopping onto g3 at some point. Now, here is where, right at this position, I think that it is fairly even here. I think I wasn't really worried too much. I think he has a good position, but I don't think my position is really horrible here. If he plays knight to d3 at this point, I was thinking I would just go ahead and exchange here. The only thing that I was worried about at this point was something like this. And during the game, and actually I think I had a response to that, but I wasn't. Again, I don't even have to exchange here right away because really the only square he's attacking that's vulnerable is my b2 bishop. And I think I had a thought of during the game I would just play something like bishop to c3 and then I'd be okay. So those were some of my thoughts during the game. But instead he played something a little, what I thought was a little odd, and that's knight f to d7. And at this point, I felt that it gave me an opportunity, okay? And I played rook to d2. And my idea here is he's not contesting this file at the moment because he's blocking his rook, so I can go ahead and double here. Again, he has this knight to d3, which I need to worry about, but again, it's not really doing too much at the moment, and in the meantime, I could pile up. So something to think about there. Now, he plays queen to c3. So this brings in a new dynamic that I need to be aware of through the rest of the game, and that's the fact that he has got this battery, this potential battery that's aiming towards my g2 square, okay? And of course, right now it's not protected. If for some reason this pawn disappeared and it were his turn, it would be checkmate. So this is something I have to be aware of, especially in lieu of his knight being on d3. So right now I was very comfortable during the game because I didn't feel like I was in any danger, but I do have to be very careful. Okay, so that's something we always want to keep our vigilance up. But I went ahead with my plan, rook a to d1. There was no immediate threats here, and again, I'm not really worried about knight to d3. And here's the reason why. I don't need to exchange right away. He doesn't have an immediate, I guess, power move, I guess, to punish me. He might, the one thing thought you might be going knight to d3 and then maybe to here. But if I were to just move my, if he did, just move my bishop out of the way, it's not a big deal, and I'll just move my queen if he threatens it. So um, sometimes, these positional threats we don't need to worry too much about. But again, chess is a complicated game, so you need to take each position um, at face value and analyze each position. And even though we have our concepts in our mind about different things, open files, weak pawns, are kind of our automatic thought process. We always have to look at the specifics of the position and see if if our thoughts are valid or our preconceptions. So okay, he plays an interesting move here, bishop to f6, because what he's noticing is that this rook here is hanging. Um, if he were to move his knight, I would win a rook. And you can see that there because the only thing protecting it is the rook, and I've got two rooks on it. So he moves his bishop to protect it, which I thought was a little, his position's getting a little convoluted here. Like all of these pieces are all depending on each other. So, and I was trying to find a way to do this. Now, of course, he's running low on time here. He's got less than 5 minutes here. I think I've got probably about 15, 20 minutes left on our clock. Okay, I play knight to g3. Again, right now, I'm just improving my position, improving my pieces, okay? Because it's this knight on g3 now, it's aiming at this e4 pawn, which will play a role in a couple minutes. Okay. Rook to e6. And again, now, I think what he was, so let me go back a second here. One of the things I was considering was this, rook to d6. But then after he plays queen to c7, I'm not winning anything at the moment. So, and the fear was that, he would, let's say I made a move, and I'm just going to make this move here, like a3. Well, then he can, and not that this would be a good move. I was afraid of something where he would be able to cut off the connection between these rooks, and so even though it wouldn't tactically work out here, that was kind of the idea of his fearing. So I didn't want to play something like that. Remember, this is what we're talking about. We don't need to always play forcing, aggressive moves. We just have to make moves. Sometimes you can win a game by just not making moves that lose, and that's what happened in this game. In the analysis, I did find a few better moves I could have made, more brilliant moves, but I didn't make any moves that went from winning to losing or an even game to losing. And when you can avoid making those type of moves, then you can focus on, well, how can I make the best move? If you could just avoid making bad moves first, okay? So we don't want to rush into something like rook to d6. If there was some big combo where I could win a piece, that would have been great. But I couldn't find one, so I didn't. I'm not going to guess, especially since I have an advantage on the clock. My position is decent. Here, I would say the position's about even for both sides. So there's no reason to make a move that could potentially cause me some troubles later. Okay, knight to g3 I played, rook to e6, and again, I think he's fearing this rook to d6 move, but really kind of out of place here. Knight to g4. Okay, this is an important move here. Because the problem he has is that he has too many pieces that are kind of clumped in these squares here. And by forking these, because this bishop, now I've got two pieces aiming here, and I'm telling him he has got to do something with this. In the meantime, I'm also using a knight that's just sitting here on h2 square and threatening his more powerful knight. And then here's where everything kind of blows up. I think I'm starting to gain the advantage here. I think he's the problem. There was a practical issue, of course. He's low on time, but also he's got some nice aspects to his position, but he's got this piece kind of hanging. There's a lot of liabilities as well. So he plays knight to d3. Okay, let me just show you. If he played knight takes g4, then I could play something like bishop takes g4, which hitting his rook. But he plays knight to d3, and again, I don't have to take it right away. I could play something else. But this was actually a critical position. Lot of choices here, and I thought that at this point I could somehow get some type of advantage. So a couple options I had here was knight takes f6 check. In analysis, this actually would have been very good. combined with this move, knight takes e4. I was worried about this move here, but I just win material after taking here because there's no checkmate threat on this specific move. Okay, so for example, rook takes, and he has to move his knight, and then I can just protect my, against checkmate because I have this bishop to f3 move, for example. If he moves his knight back, for example, then bishop takes f3, no more checkmate threat. Okay, and then now, let's see, I am up pawn as well as let me see what material balance. It looks like I'm just up a pawn, but my position's great. He's going to be losing material, I think, if he plays something like this. Um, then there's a lot of tactics here based on the rook check, things like that. Okay. Anyways, again, gonna stay away from spending too much time on any tactical shot here. But knight takes f6 check definitely was something I considered. The move I played was I thought again my initial thought way back when was to play something like bishop to c3. My later analysis after the game shows that might have been okay. But what I played in the game was actually very good as well, and that was knight takes e4. Okay, and here's a couple things about that is that it takes away the defender here. So now this knight is hanging. Okay, so if he takes my bishop, for example, well then I've got this check here, and he's gonna lose some material here because I've got 1, 2, 3 on this knight, and he's only got 2 defending. If he takes with the knight, of course, his rook is hanging. Okay, and so when he takes with the rook, he is going to at least lose the exchange. Okay, and again, he can't take with the knight because he loses his rook. So if he takes back with the queen, then I can take this knight. And if we look here, he has, let's see, he's lost at least the exchange and a pawn. So I'm up fairly handily there. Okay, let's go back here. Let's see here. If he takes with the bishop, then let's see, what could I do here? Actually, I could make an intermediate move, bishop to f3, obviously threatening here. And if he moves his queen out of the way, then I can do something like, let's see here. Can I go rook takes, yeah, just something like rook takes d3 or queen takes d3. Again, this rook is still hanging here. So actually, queen takes d3 might be better just because it protects this knight again. Okay, so knight takes e4 is very dangerous here. So what did he do? Well, he played rook takes e4, which I think was one of the better moves that he could have done. And here, what I did was I took here knight takes f6 check because I kind of wanted to get rid of any of the tactics. Here again, now my clock is down to about 5 minutes. He's actually down under a minute here, so he's playing very quickly. So a lot of any mistakes that he made, I think, are due to his time trouble. But it is a complicated position. And here he takes back with the knight because now his knight isn't hanging here. And I go ahead and I take back this knight. So let's take a look at this position-wise material. I am up a pawn because of this e4 pawn here, but it's a very dangerous position. Okay. He plays rook takes d3, and I play rook takes d3 here. And actually, this ends up being a mistake. Okay, because remember, he still has this threat here, and now he could play rook takes c4, actually, which is what he plays. So he's threatening my queen as well as mate here. Okay, I play rook takes to d8 check. Actually, let's go back real quick. So instead of playing rook takes d3, rook takes d3, rook takes d3, what I could have played instead is queen takes d3, because now he doesn't have that the tactic. If he plays rook takes d4, well, I threaten him first. He takes, then I take here first, and then let's say he plays something like queen to c7. Then I take his bishop here, okay? And then in this position, if we just go and look at this, I've got this nice rook and this bishop, as well as an extra pawn against his queen, which um, you could say material-wise, with the typical material count is fairly even, but I've got a lot of my pieces are very active, so I think that's very good here. So, anyways, let's go back to the game. Rook takes d3, rook takes c4, and then I did have this rook to d8 check in mind when I played that. Um, he plays king takes g7, and again, now I'm starting to feel a little time pressure, but also I want to keep the pressure on him, and I make a critical error actually, but I think it's uh, probably the best move in the position. Bishop takes f6, and now actually in post analysis, my opponent could have saved himself. Okay, so he plays king takes f6 because he wants to maintain this threat, and I get my queen out of the way with queen to b2 check. After he plays here, king to e7, then I threaten his queen here. Okay, now what he could have done after bishop takes f6 check, if he takes back with the queen, now things are fairly even because he's threatening my queen here. I no longer have that check. So if I take his rook, he takes my rook. And material is even. This is probably a draw. Okay. That was his opportunity. However, I think in time trouble, he was wanting to maintain this mate threat. He takes back with the king. Queen to b2 check, king to e7. And here, after bishop takes f3, this is a winning position for me. He plays queen to c7, and he's going to threaten this rook. But I take here first. So when he takes my rook, the point is that I now have a combination that wins. Queen to f6 check, and then after he plays king to e8. Now, for example, if he were to play queen to e7, then I could just go queen takes e7, king takes e7, and take his rook, and that should be an easy win for me. But instead, he plays king to e8, and I play very nice move here. He only had a few. He actually, I think his clock might have been down here, but I wanted to just play it out with him. Bishop to c6 check, and after king to f8, I take his rook, and then he resigns. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please press the like button, and also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let me know in the comments what you thought about maintaining the tension and about tension in your games. Let me know how I can help you and what other topics you'd love to see. Okay, have a great day, and I will see you soon.